Hey guys, welcome back to Serial at Midnight. My name is Heath Holland, and I'm joined by author, editor, mega geek Adam Christopher. Adam, welcome to Serial at Midnight.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here, honestly.
This is the book that I'm holding up. This is the one that I have on hand right now. But like, this is a huge deal. You are a I don't want to minimize your scope, but a Star Wars author is a really big deal. So congratulations on being
Oh,
the author of multiple Star Wars stories.
thank you very much. Yeah, it's I forget sometimes that like it's a dream come true. And I don't say that kind of to be facetious. It's like this is like an honor to be able to contribute to such a universe. And yeah, I have fun doing it too, which is always a plus.
You've also got footprints in a lot of different franchises and properties. You've done things with Stranger Things, books for Stranger Things. You've done
Yeah.
Dishonored for the video game series. I want to talk a little bit about the Doctor Who, the magazine, editing the magazine. Was it the New Zealand?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking
Oh
about?
my
Yeah.
God. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I edited, so I'm a Doctor Who fan. And, I grew up in the 80s in New Zealand. I live
Hmm.
in the UK now, but I grew up in New Zealand. And like New Zealand TV was so far behind everything in those days. I grew up watching John Pertwee Doctor Who, which is from the 70s. And I was growing up in the 80s. So it's like I'm completely out of sync with everything. Um, but in the days before the internet and in the days when we had like pen pals and you wrote letters and things, there was a small community of Doctor Who fans. And the Doctor Who fan club was where you made friends and you met people and you could talk about this thing that you loved. Um, and you'd swap video cassettes and books and things. And again, this sounds totally archaic now, but like there was a fanzine called TSV, Time Space Visualizer, and it was the fanzine of the New Zealand Doctor Who fan club. Um,
What time frame are we talking about here?
we're talking, so okay, so the fanzine itself started in 1987, which is way before my time.
Mhm.
I joined the fan club in 1990, and I was 12, and I eventually took over as editor in about 2002, I think.
So before the
Um,
series came back, when it was still
yes,
classic, yeah.
yeah, and in fact, it was yeah. So in fact, there was that transition. I only did maybe 6 or 7 issues, but I kind of did that transition between the old and the new. Um, and actually, it was the first place that published my fiction because when I was at school. I've always written and I would write Doctor Who fan fiction. And in fact, the earliest stuff that I ever wrote when I was probably about 6 or 7, which I've still got some of, it's Doctor Who fan fiction, but it's very clearly what I was watching on TV that week. It was like my own novelization of this week's episode of John Pertwee Doctor Who.
Did you get a cease and
Um,
desist from Terrence Dix? He's like,
ah,
stop it.
man. I mean, again, he was, my favorite author was Terrence Dicks. My school library was really good because it had every target Doctor Who novelization up to that point. So like that's all I read, and I'm sure my parents were kind of despairing that like I would read nothing else but Doctor Who. Um, but then I was writing Doctor Who fan fiction myself, and it just kind of kept going. And then as I got older and kind of better at it, TSV, again, this kind of old-fashioned concept of a physical fanzine, like A5 paper stapled, folded, posted to you once every couple of months. You could write reviews and features and things, but like you could write fiction and they would publish it. And the first stuff that I ever had, I mean, published, I'm talking about, this is a photocopied magazine and it's being sent to 200 people. Um, but like that was it. And kind of from there, I edited it, won an award, which was amazing. It's funny because like the fanzine obviously died away because with the internet, especially like 2000s, 2010s, clearly the internet was a replacement for things like fanzines because you could get news about Doctor Who instantly. You didn't have to wait 3 months for Doctor Who magazine to arrive by post. Um, and you could talk to people on social media later on, and but like forums, and news boards and things. Doctor Who had always had a very big sort of community on Usenet and things like that. Um, but it's interesting that recently I've started getting back into fanzines. So I think with a lot of things, and we talk about like, vinyl records, physical media, cassette tapes, some things are coming back because I think people now recognize that there's actually the speed and immediacy of the internet and the connections that that allows is almost not the point. That there's something else about, let's say, a fanzine that does something else. It's like it works some other part of your brain and part of your fandom. So, for example, there's a fanzine here in the UK called Hellebore, which is about British folk horror. So it's like legends and myth and stories, but it's also kind of what we call, I don't know, classical folk horror. Things like The Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw and that kind of, movie, TV, book side of things. But like it's a fanzine, it's a printed publication. It comes out every few months. And reading it, and I have to say it has much higher production values than like TSV used to have. This looks like a magazine. Um, but like there's something about it. It's like you sit down and you read and you're absorbed by the content and by the work and the thought that's gone into it. And yeah, you can read articles online or you can read reviews or interviews, but I don't know, there's something about it and it's almost hard to explain what it is.
It feels kind of
Um,
disposable, doesn't it?
the internet
The internet,
being,
yeah. When
yeah,
you read something, like
yeah.
if I read an article on the internet versus if I read it in a fanzine or a magazine or a book, it feels different. It feels because it just goes away when you're done with it.
Yeah, and there's something about like the physical nature of it. Someone I was talking to an author friend who used to work with Jason Segel, the actor, Freaks and Geeks and many and Muppet Movie and all that kind of stuff. But like he had this really good point where um, for some people there's like this kind of spatial awareness part of your brain that works with physical objects and I mean, I don't want to get into the whole argument of like ebooks versus physical books, but for me,
I
it's
was
like I
gonna
read
ask you
both.
that.
But
Yeah,
yeah, but
okay.
like physical, there's something about seeing where you are in a story, how far through you are. You're not even thinking about it consciously, but there's something about it that for some people, they're kind of their brain needs that. And like for this fanzine I'm talking about, it's the same thing. I will pick it up and read the next article that's in it, but I'm also like flipping through it and I'm aware of what I've read before, and it's like it's still there. Like it's not disposable. Um, whereas like a website, you may never see it again. So I just kind of, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying this I'm interested, and especially as someone who, like, especially in the old days, like the amount of work that went into TSV was just like backbreaking. Um, and I think you can see that in if it's done well, you can see it in the finished product.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I'm excited by things like fanzines again. I sound so old. I'm a yeah.
But well, we are old school. You and I are the same age. I think you're a year older than me, but we're pretty much the same
Right.
age. And I think we're seeing this cycle coming back around where people that are younger than us are realizing that this intangibility doesn't benefit them and that that's why there's
Mm,
been this pull toward vinyl and that's why people are collecting physical media and why even if somebody listens to a record. I use this statistic kind of often. Half of the people that are buying records vinyl don't have a record player. They can't listen to it. They're buying it just to one, to support the artist, two, so that they can hold it up and look at the artwork while they're listening to it on Spotify or whatever.
mm,
Because I think that we're innately wired for an interactive experience. We want to engage with the stuff that we have, with our art, I guess. And after 25 years, or however long it's been since physical sort of started to take a back seat to digital, I think people are missing things. But I want to go back to something that you were talking about. You mentioned that you were writing fan fiction for Doctor Who. It's interesting to me that some of your first writing was in another, like a world that you didn't create, right? Other people's sandboxes. Now you've certainly written your own works, your own novels, your original creations. But I think that's an interesting point that these worlds can be a gateway for imagination and to explore your skills and to maybe kind of develop a voice. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think I was probably quite lucky being a Doctor Who fan because Doctor Who, old Doctor Who I'm talking about, um, kind of always had this legacy of the written word. Especially because if you go right back, 60s and 70s, 70s in particular, when you were watching Doctor Who originally on TV, like it was never repeated. VHS didn't exist. It was on and then it was gone. And like maybe British television being kind of slightly weird, maybe you'd get a repeat sometime, but probably not.
And
So
in some
Doctor
cases,
Who,
it didn't even exist anymore because they had wiped the tapes.
yeah, exactly. But Doctor Who had this wonderful thing where like the TV episodes were novelized as books. So like it's not unique to Doctor Who, but like it's a particular thing where Doctor Who, being such a long running series, could be relived by fans, especially young fans, in kind of book form. So then even when I started watching Doctor Who, which was about 1985, I was I already then started reading the books. So the idea that what I loved on TV also existed in a written form was kind of there from the beginning. And it's like, well, I could do this and write stuff that I love. And again, maybe I was lucky because when I was at school, and again, like about 6 years old, writing fiction, they called it process writing for something for some reason, but like that was part of the day. Like after lunch, there'd be like half an hour of process writing. Um, which is great. And it meant that I think the teachers got annoyed because I was just writing Doctor Who fan fiction when I was six
Reverse the
years old.
polarity of the neutron star.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got, well, maybe I did. Did I get that in? I don't know if I can spell polarity. Um, but yeah, so like it's probably just like a confluence of happy coincidences um, that I always associated what I love with writing. It's interesting looking back on it, the two kind of things that were in my life were Doctor Who and Star Wars. Now, Doctor Who was TV and books. Star Wars was movies and action figures. But I was kind of doing the same kind of thing because I would watch Doctor Who and then write my own stories. I would watch Star Wars and I would also write my own stories, but like with action figures. So, and toys. So it was the same kind of creative process in a way, but like in two different kind of forms. Um, and again, that's part of why I think Star Wars and Doctor Who have both survived because they had this creativity built into them. And if you were the right age at the right time, you could kind of um, get into it. But it's funny, you talk about writing tie-ins, and like I said, I've done original work and stuff. I never really imagined I could write tie-ins because, or licensed fiction, for worlds that I didn't create, because how do you do that? How do you get into it? And it was, I'd written my own original novels and I had a couple published. This is about 2011 or 12.
Well, hold on. Can I go back?
And
Like you're in
yeah,
high school, right? Let's go back to
oh
the
yeah, okay.
well, the 90s. The Star Wars expanded universe is being born. Timothy Zahn's novels,
Yeah.
and then Kevin J. Anderson doing the Jedi Academy trilogy. Were you aware of any of this? Were you reading any of that stuff at the time?
No, absolutely not.
Wow.
So the only
So
the only
yes
Star
to
Wars
Doctor
book,
Who, but not to Star Wars.
yeah, somehow, and I don't know why, it kind of missed me. Um, the only Star Wars book I had was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which my dad had a copy of, which I read and was kind of like, I don't understand what this is. Um, my Star Wars fandom kind of drifted away as I kind of got too old for toys and things. But then when the special edition Star Wars came out in '97, and I remember, again, this is going to sound so ancient, but like lining up outside the theater to buy my tickets for 2 hours on like a Friday night, freezing cold. Um, that kind of reignited my love of Star Wars because I was blown away by special editions, new special effects, and everything.
Mhm.
But somehow, I don't know if it was because my attention was so focused on Doctor Who, because by that point in Doctor Who's history, the original series had finished in '89, but it continued in books, much like Star Wars did. The new adventures and the missing adventures of Doctor Who were coming out monthly, and I was kind of like, I was reading those. Um, and I just, for some reason, I just don't recall really even seeing Star Wars books. And it wasn't until much, much later that, um, I became aware of it and then started reading them myself. Because again, it's like, wait a second, there's a whole thing of Star Wars that I don't know about. And like these new adventures of something that I love. So I really started to read those. But yeah, really came late to it, bizarrely.
Okay. So I'll take you back to where you were. So it's the 2000s now. You've got some novels that are being published.
Yeah.
Continue.
So, so it was a publisher, one of my publishers in the UK, who was doing one of my original novels. I went to lunch with the editors, as you do, like celebrating a new book deal and like this is going to be great. And while we were having lunch, they were talking about Elementary, which is the TV show. It's Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu, modern day Sherlock Holmes, set in New York, and they were doing novels, original novels based on Elementary. And I was like, wow, this is amazing because like at the time that was my favorite TV show. I love Sherlock Holmes and Elementary. And I was like, I've got to write one of these books. What are you talking about? And they're like, no, it's all sewn up, it's done, there's some books, this guy is doing them, and like that's it. So it's like, okay, fine. And I was kind of like crestfallen. But and I told my agent about it because I was like, it's such a bummer, because I wanted to write some kind of licensed tie-in fiction. And then it was 6 weeks later, I got a call from my agent, and she's like, "Do you still want to do Elementary?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." So it turned out that somehow the guy they had signed up hadn't written the books, and they needed the first book really quickly. So I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So the I had to do like an audition chapter for CBS, who was the studio producing it, to show that I knew what Elementary was and then I could write the characters. So I did like the first two chapters of this book, and they're like, "Great, you're hired. You've got 3 weeks to write the first book. Go." So
That's
I wrote
fast.
the first book in 3 weeks. Yeah, but I
Did you
loved
have
it.
any sort of a preconceived outline for what you wanted to, when you first asked about it, did your brain
Yeah,
like, what would we write?
yeah. I was like, well, like you always do. Like you're always thinking of ideas, and they sent me some scripts. They sent me like a story Bible, internal one, like they had compiled. And I think at this point, the show was in the middle of season three or even earlier. I can't quite remember. And they really had no instructions whatsoever. All it was I had to write a story that I couldn't break anything or kill anybody or do anything. And again, having read by that point Star Wars and Doctor Who, I kind of knew what I was doing because it's like, okay, I've got to make this story the kind of, let's pretend it's like the mid-season two-part special episode because obviously a book is longer, it's going to be longer than like a TV episode. So this kind of exciting story, but it can slot into the existing season without messing anything up. So I'd kind of, being the geek I am, I made a big spreadsheet and I listed the episodes and I found where the gaps were and I slotted my story in. And I ended up doing two novels. Um, and it was amazing. And I remember getting you get the author copy, and it's like, I never imagined in a million years I would have a book with Lucy Liu on the cover. Now, Johnny Lee Miller is on the cover as well, right? Obviously. But like Lucy Liu is like, she's a film star. This is like on the cover of my book. Um, so I kind of got hooked on the idea of writing for other people's universes.
Was
which
there ever any opportunity that it might have led to some script work, to some teleplay work?
I don't think so. And I think with a lot of, I mean, I guess it depends on the property, but for a lot of these kind of licensed works, they really keep it separate. Now, for Elementary, for Stranger Things, which I did later, absolutely, I had involvement with the producers, the script consultants. You know, I think ultimately for Elementary, the producer of Elementary gave notes and final approval. And with Stranger Things, it was one of the senior script consultants and this producer who kind of like were an edit, almost like an editor as well on it. But really, they want to keep it separate. And I can kind of see why, because just because I can write a book doesn't mean I can write a screenplay. Um, and if you think about it in a kind of commercial way, what they're doing with books and comics and things like that is they're kind of exploiting the license rights that they have. It's like you've got Stranger Things, for example, there's going to be board games, comic books, novels, audio drama, like every kind of avenue of merchandise you can think of, they're going to exploit because why not? Stranger Things is great and it's popular. So I never I never felt that there was going to be any opportunity, but I kind of knew that from the beginning. I went in thinking, look, this is a book. I'm going to do a good job, and that's kind of it.
When did Star Wars, the galaxy far, far away, start to materialize as a viable, like I could actually write a Star Wars show?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, like, there's it's going to sound weird. There's kind of hierarchies of licensed fiction or
There,
hierarchies of
definitely.
universes. Yeah. So to me, Star Wars was always the top of the pile. It's like there is no bigger franchise, there is no bigger mythology, modern mythology than Star Wars. So like if I want to do it, it's going to take a long time and it's going to take a lot of work. And I knew that from the beginning. And I also knew that doing things like Elementary and then Dishonored was the next tie-in I'd done. And I was doing these at the same time as my original like science fiction novels. But I knew that that was, if not getting me attention for writing tie-ins, it was giving me practice for writing tie-ins because like it's a very particular kind of thing. It's different to writing your own stuff. Um, but it was the first teaser or The Force Awakens came out, and that was, I think, 2014. And I was like, there's a friend of mine, an author, Chuck Wendig. Now, Chuck and I have known each other for a long time, and he actually, we have the same agent, and it was actually he introduced me to his agent, and then I have her as my agent, and I have had since like 15 years. So anyway, so we were close and good friends, and I sent him a message. I was like, "Oh my God, this teaser looks amazing. I would love to write a Star Wars book." And he was like, "Well, it's funny you should say that because I'm writing a Star Wars book." And he's told this story before, so like I'm not talking out of turn, but he wrote three Star Wars novels, the Aftermath trilogy, um, set after Return of the Jedi, and he kind of got it by posting on Twitter saying, "I really want a Star Wars book." And now he's a successful author with a very big following, and the right people saw that tweet, and it sounds crazy, but it kind of happened.
Does sound crazy.
But to fast forward, um, through him, I was introduced to the Star Wars editorial team at Del Rey, and apart from being friends, he liked my work genuinely and was like, "Well, yeah, you should write a Star Wars book." So he got me introduction to the editors, and which was extremely kind and gracious. He did not need to do that at all. And it was at San Diego Comic Con 2015 where I met the editor, Elizabeth Schaefer, and we had a drink. And she's like, "Okay, you want to write Star Wars? Well, there's no books available, We do so few a year. There's a million authors who want to write them. If you really want to do it, you're going to be waiting a very long time, and it's very hard work and doesn't pay very well, and it's terrible. You should definitely not do a Star Wars book. And I was like, that all sounds great to me. I'm happy to wait. Let's keep talking. And we kind of did. And like, so over the next few years, we'd meet up at conventions. Especially for me, I'm based in the UK, and the big US conventions are really important for networking. Sounds like so mercenary, but it's like this is where you meet editors and people and publicists and like you meet the people that can make things happen. But you're doing it. I'm doing it because I love it. I don't go to San Diego Comic Con to schmooze with people. I go because I love everything about San Diego Comic Con, and I geek out buying Transformers and everything. But the point is, like she said, it's going to take 5 years at least. Like you're going to be waiting, and like you got to make sure you want to do it. And it was fast forwarding a little bit, but it was 5 years later that I got the email saying, "I've got a book for you. Do you want to do it?" Now, before that, I did Stranger Things, and Stranger Things is the same publishing team as Star Wars. So it was a different editor, Tom Holler, but it was the same editorial team. And I knew when I did Stranger Things that I had to do a good job because, like, I'm working with the same people, and this was my audition for Star Wars. Now, I love Stranger Things, absolutely. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't. And I had a lot of fun writing the book, but the kind of the pressure was on a little bit.
Mhm.
Like, this has got to be really good.
Do you
Um,
think the Stranger Things work was like a test to see if you
yeah,
could?
well,
It was
yes
both,
and no.
right?
Like, not, it was both. Like, not like you must do this book as a test to pass. Because the great thing about them, they do a lot of other tie-ins, like Minecraft, World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, Critical Role. The great thing about the team is that they really find the authors that suit the projects. They don't just give things to people because you want to do it. It's like, does this kind of thing suit you? And for Stranger Things, my book, Darkness on the Edge of Town, is Jim Hopper's kind of origin story set in New York in the late 70s during the famous blackout, I think 1977. And they wanted me to write it because my original science fiction stuff has always had a kind of crime detective story
Yeah, like
element.
a noir.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Sometimes deliberately so. I wrote a book, Empire State was my first novel, and it's very much of like a hard-boiled pastiche. And then I wrote a series called, well, it started with Made to Kill, which is about a robot detective, deliberately kind of aping the kind of Raymond Chandler thing. Um, but it was, I was the right fit for Stranger Things for that particular project because it was, it's about a cop and about an investigation. So they, there were and there still are very few Star Wars opportunities, and they wanted to work with me because I'd got to know them. And Stranger Things came along, which was really cool. In between, or around the same time, I had done some Star Wars stuff. So they did a anthology from a certain point of view, which celebrated 40 years of A New Hope. And because it was like 40 stories telling 40 different points of view of the movie, there was room for new authors. So I was lucky enough to get into the first one. That was my first, Star Wars piece. And I ended up doing all three. There's like, I'm one of three authors who are in all three of the From a Certain Point of View anthologies. And I also did a comic for IDW. They did a series called Star Wars Adventures, which was an all ages kind of connected miniseries. Um, and they needed like a sequel trilogy character short story. So I did one with Tally Lintra, who was an A-wing pilot from The Last Jedi, and she has this kind of little adventure. So like I'd done some little bits of Star Wars, but yeah, it was a weird day. It was March the 20th, 2020, and that I remember because that day the UK government just announced their lockdown for COVID. And it was like this big thing on TV, and it's like you're going to be locked inside for 3 weeks. And I was like, oh my God, the world's ending. And then I got the email saying, oh, we've got the Star Wars book if you'd like to do it. Um, so yeah, that was a really, really weird
It's
day.
incredible timing.
Yeah, it's just like so bizarre. But that book was actually the Mandalorian novel for the time of the TV series. And for various reasons, we ended up we couldn't do it in the end. But they had a kind of this backup idea, which was Shadow of the Sith. So it's like it's a whole kind of like it's been on for ages, and this whole thing. Okay, we're gonna have to cancel Mandalorian. Everyone's bummed, obviously. And they're like, well, we've got this other idea. Would you like to write the story of Lando and Luke chasing Ochi of Bestoon? And like that was it. Like that one line from The Rise of Skywalker when like Rey meets Lando Calrissian in the desert of Basana. And he's just like, oh yeah, me and Luke were chasing Ochi who was on the quest for a Sith Wayfinder. And he'd like the little hologram of Ochi. And then that's it. And they're like, yeah, you should write that story. Um, yeah, and that was it. And that was Shadow of the Sith.
So how, I don't know how much you're going to be able to answer this, but how much of that story did you conceive and how much of it was what kind of rails were you on?
It's like, well, I'm not joking when I say like that was the instruction. It was like take that single line from the movie and write a book about it.
Wow.
Um, but it's this kind of thing like with tie-ins, they seek out authors who know what they're doing. And again, I don't want to be I'm not trying to be gatekeeping, but by that I mean they not only understand the property that they're working in, but they know how to write a book. And the only way you can really show that is by having your own kind of body of work, which I had done by that point for several years with my own kind of original science fiction novels. So I could write a book that could be published. It was good enough to be published. And also I could write tie-ins. I'd done Elementary, Dishonored, Stranger Things. So they knew that like, I was kind of in safe hands. So they literally could say, take that line in the movie and write a book, knowing that I would come up with a story that they wanted.
Yeah.
Because like, with Elementary, the show was being made while I was writing the book. And like the people who make the show do not want to waste their time babysitting some author who's trying to write a book. They want to know that you can go away and do it and come back with a finished product. These people are kind of
Yeah.
busy, and with Stranger Things, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, there was a script consultant, the producer, but like they had to have the confidence that I could kind of do the job. And this is why I think Star Wars, I kind of consider it to be the top of the ladder because like it's so big and so important, and there are so many people looking at it. Like they have to pick the right authors. Now, having said that, that kind of sounds very pretentious, but like I'm just sort of talking about it in terms of like a track record and the ability to say, take that line and write the book. And then from there, it was like there was an outline, really huge outline, and then back and forth with the editors and with Lucasfilm, getting everything sorted. They had ideas, I had ideas, like anything. It's like it's a collaboration in some ways. Um, and then yeah, write
That's
the book.
that's what you answered my. So I was curious because there's so much lore in it, and Star Wars is so guarded, right? And for people that haven't read this book, I've just teased a little bit. I mean, you expand on Lando and Luke as he's training Jedi, and like Ben is there, and there's these shadows of the Sith that you're expanding what we know about the Sith. You're expanding what we know about Luke off, before we catch up with him in the sequel trilogy. You're expanding um, Rey's parents and like that thing. Like, there's a lot of really important Star Wars
Hmm.
components in this. So I was just really curious, like how much were they holding your hand? And I get that there's this back and forth, but it almost like I think fans and maybe even myself might wonder, like, well, did they just hand you an outline and say, like,
Hmm.
stay in this parameter, make sure you work in this, and this?
Well, it's interesting because I knew immediately that I was in an almost unique position because, Shadow of the Sith is set almost exactly between Return of the Jedi and the sequel trilogy, which is at the time, and even still now, is like almost completely uncharted
Yep.
territory. And I talked before about how with Elementary, it kind of, those stories slotted exactly between episodes of the TV seasons. And that's often the case with Star Wars in particular. It's a very specific story or character to explore. I suddenly had this very open canvas, and I could do things that I knew you can't normally do in things like Star Wars. So, I could develop the character of Lando because so much had happened to him since the original trilogy that we had never seen. And I could kind of figure out where he was between the two trilogies. And like you said, Luke Skywalker, he's rebuilt a Jedi temple. He is now, before everything goes wrong, before Ben turns, before it all collapses and he flees, it's like he's at that point, like his pinnacle. He's like the most powerful person in the galaxy. Um, and he's rebuilding the Jedi from scratch using a, a history that he himself never experienced because he was never a Padawan. He was never at a temple. So he's kind of rebuilding from the ground up. Like this kind of storytelling doesn't happen very often in any licensed fiction. Um, so I had that weird freedom, and I knew that from the start. It's like you talk about Rey's parents; they appear in Rise of Skywalker for like 2 seconds. There's like two flashes. They have no names, one line of dialogue, and that's it. And yet, this book is basically their story. So I effectively created these characters. I didn't create the characters, but I created the characters. Um,
Yeah.
and it's like my greatest geeky memory is the fact that I named her parents. And it sounds so minor, but like that is now established Star Wars lore. It's like there's
Yeah.
Dathan and Miramir. And like whenever I see it in other books or magazines, I still can't get over it. It's like, yeah, those are my names. It's like
Yeah.
that's them. Yeah.
They're Wikipedia articles
Oh
just
man.
about things you created. Yeah.
Yeah.
How have you, I'm asking this question very carefully. How have how have your experiences with Star Wars fandom been? Have they been mostly positive, or it's a volatile fandom, it's a divided fandom right now, but I would like to know what your experience has been.
It's been good. I do events, like the big, we talk about, San Diego Comic Con, New York Comic Con. Um, I'm online quite a lot, procrastinating, avoiding work. Um, but like,
When
I
I
think
see you
it's,
online, should I be like, hey, get back to writing?
yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
It's worse online than it is in person, I imagine.
it is. And I think sometimes, not myself, but I've seen it in other people. It's like they're sometimes surprised. They go to San Diego Comic Con and like it's great. You're kind of a little bit wary of what's going to happen. And like it's amazing. You sit there and I sign 200 books for an hour, and everyone who comes in the line is absolutely delighted to be there and meet me, which is weird. And they've stood there for an hour, which is weird. But there's such a joy in the experience. And I'm at these kind of things and doing these things for them. Um, I remember once I was in Phoenix at Phoenix Comic Con, and it was like an afternoon Sunday. For some reason, they'd given me like a 3 hour signing window, which is crazy. Um,
That's a long time.
yeah, and like the authors, like there's a whole bunch of us, and like they all left, and I'm like, well, I've got nothing to do, so I'm going to sit here 3 hours and drink some coffee. And it was like ten minutes before the end. This guy runs in, like sprints into the hall. He's got a huge bag of books. And he's like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're still here. I I've come from Toronto. My flights were cancelled. There was disruption. Things happened. It was a disaster. I came to this convention just to meet you because you're my favorite author. And I could only come on this day. And I got here just in time. Would you sign my books?" And I'm like, absolutely, because like my job was was it's for him. It's for them. It's like if I get a 3 hour signing window, I'm going to sit there for 3 hours because there could be someone who comes in who could only come for one day. The whole purpose of their visit was to, for some reason, meet me and get a book signed.
Mhm.
And it's like it's part of the job, but it's also a real joy. And it's something that I never take for granted. It's like if I can entertain someone to the extent where they will inconvenience themselves like that to get a book signed, then absolutely, I'll do it. And that's kind of been my experience. It's been really happy, and um, I like Star Wars. I'll go online and I like Skeleton Crew. I like the actor line. I watched Revenge of the Sith the other day. It's a great movie. It's like I read whatever book. It's great because I love Star Wars. What is there not to like about something that you love? I love Doctor Who. I love World of Warcraft. Um, I just kind of find the joy in it
Yeah.
because
That's a
who's got time for the other stuff?
that's an interesting point, isn't it? Who's got time for the other stuff? Because people are choosing to focus on
Hmm.
negativity and unhappiness. And really, who has time for that?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm getting older.
Yeah.
Um, you realize what's important.
We don't have infinite time, so we better
Mm,
enjoy the
yeah,
time that we have.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, listen to us, two old men shouting at the clouds.
Let me ask you
Uh,
this. Do you see your tie-in work leading people to your original work?
good question. I think the accepted wisdom, whatever that means, is that it kind of doesn't. Because I think the more dedicated a fan base is for something like Star Wars, well, like lots of things,
Are they
you can
entrenched in the
imagine,
thing,
yeah,
isolated?
like they
Yeah.
like a lot of Star Wars readers don't read other books. A lot of Doctor Who readers don't read other books. Obviously, there's overlap, and there's some do, and well, a lot do. But I think in general, it's like that's not something to go into it expecting. It's great if people do, and I've had Star Wars readers who have discovered my work, and we've kind of become friends online, and they talk about what they're reading, and they ask me about my other stuff, which is great. Um, but I think it's not a given, and it's also like it's not why I do it. Um, which goes back to kind of fundamentals. Like I like writing Star Wars because I like Star Wars. I liked writing Stranger Things because I like Stranger Things. Um, I am a kind of writer who enjoys licensed work. Not everyone does, not everyone can do it because, as I said, it works differently in your brain as a writer. Is a different kind of writing. Not everyone can do it. Not everyone likes it. Um, I do like it. I enjoy it. So yeah.
Do you enjoy the original creative process as well, or is that something that you see as you move towards, I mean, once you're a Star Wars author, do you still
Well,
want to write other things?
yeah. Well, it's kind of funny thing. It's like yes, I do, and I still do, and I still am. Um, although yeah, licensed work does take up a lot of time, and especially if you want to keep in it and keep doing it, you kind of have to take on new projects, and it does take time. And you get this weird kind of thing, which I completely acknowledge with something like Star Wars, is that suddenly you're dropped into it, and you can go to San Diego Comic Con and sign books for an hour. That never would never happen with my own work. Like you, with something like Star Wars or World of Warcraft or Doctor Who or Star Trek or any kind of big property, you've got an inbuilt fan base. Um, and that's not to say you can't do the work. Obviously, you've got to do the work, and it has to be good work. But it is a weird thing where you're kind of parachuted in. So yeah, so it's like sometimes I like any writer, I think it's ups and downs. I get to enjoy signing books for an hour, and then the next day I get to go to another booth and sit there with no one around because no one cares about whatever other book I've got out. But like, because it's not me, it's Star Wars, or it's Doctor Who, or it's World of Warcraft, you know. Um, and it's kind of like, well, just enjoy it, do good work to the best that I can, and if people love it, and I hope they do, then I've kind of done my part. Which is kind of how I approach most things, I think. It's kind of healthy,
That is healthy.
maybe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a potential with your creator-owned stuff for further development. I mean, like you could create something that then gets optioned for a series or for, there's more um, potential there for you as a creator. But I understand that your metaphor about being dropped into this thing, like
Yeah.
it
But that's
takes
actually
can take up yeah.
but that's an interesting point because even though if you look at it from the other side of things, doing something like Star Wars or whatever gets attention from people within the industry, not so much fans or readers, but your name is then known for doing such and such or whatever. So there's a level of yeah, absolutely, there's a level of recognition that you get, which in the future may or may not be useful to have. Because like with anything, it's being in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
Um, you can get yourself to the right place by doing the work. Publishing is kind of half luck, half work. So like you can get yourself to the right place, and then you just have to wait for the right time. So absolutely, something like Star Wars has helped, no denying. Um, but it's also something that I would never take for granted, and you can never bank on anything like that, and yeah, nor should you.
What's the saying? Preparation meets opportunity, something like that.
Yeah,
But if
something
you've
like
done the
that.
work, when the opportunity
Mm,
comes along, you'll be ready to walk through that door.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. When you look to the future, I'm not going to ask you about any specific projects, but when you look to the future, what does it look like? What are you doing? What sort of books are you writing?
Um, yeah, it's looking good. Now I say that because this is kind of peculiarities of tie-in stuff. Like my last original novel was out in 2018, which is now 7 years ago, and it'll be 8 years by the time my next original novel comes out. And for me, I was like, this is kind of terrifying. It's like I used to have a book a year out. But really, I've been so busy. I've had something out every year, whether it's a full novel like Shadow of the Sith, which was the last one, or it's a short story or a comic or something. Um, but it's been really good. But I'm looking forward to more coming. And this year in particular is going to be very, well, relatively packed with stuff coming out, which is good. And then you just got to keep going. It's like persistence. And it's like once you're in something, whether it's you've got an agent, or you've had a book published, or you're in Star Wars, or whatever, like you cannot rest. You cannot say that you've done it or achieved it or that this is it. You have to keep working because you're only like any kind of job, you're only as good as your last job. Um, and it's a never ending, not hustle, it's the wrong word, but like it's a never ending journey.
The road goes ever on.
Yeah. But
You're
like
from New
that's part,
Zealand, so let's drop some Hobbit
yeah.
references, some
Oh
Tolkien
no.
references. It does though. I mean, it's you're never there. I think that's something that's
Mm,
important to for people to realize is like you're never done. It's just a continuing it's a
yeah.
continuing journey. And you're learning things as you go and you're picking up new skills and you're picking up new relationships with people and it just continues. So I'm glad to hear that things seem pretty busy for you this year because that's a good thing. Hey, if people want to know where you're going to be, convention wise, where do you recommend they go?
Well, I recommend they fly all the way to Japan because I'm going to be at Star Wars Celebration in April, which is cool because I love Japan and I love Japanese culture and history and stuff.
I
Um,
will hopefully be watching that from the Star Wars YouTube channel. Maybe they'll,
yes, they
yeah,
will. They did last time, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and then I'll probably be at New York Comic Con in October. San Diego, July, usually, but I'm not sure yet. But those are kind of the ones I hit. But yeah, looking forward to Japan. It's gonna be wild.
Have you been to a Star Wars celebration before?
Yes. So our first one was Anaheim in 2022.
What the
What
last
year
was
is
it
it?
the last one? It
It
was
was the last one was so it was London. London was 23. Yeah, so 22.
okay.
It was this was super weird because Shadow of the Sith was not yet out. Nobody had read it because it was out later that year. But the hype was so huge for the book that for this is going to sound terrible, terrible. For a weekend, I could pretend I was famous, which is like, but like I say that jokingly, but it was such a weird experience because people would stop me for autographs and selfies. They hadn't read a word I'd written. Um, I was stopped in line for lunch. I was like Anaheim Convention Center, and there's like a boulevard with hotels. And I was like walking from the convention center to my hotel, and people were like calling out across the boulevard at me. It was the weirdest and coolest, absolutely cool, but like such a weird thing. Um, and then Star Wars Celebration London, the book had been out for like a year, and I signed autographs and had selfies at McDonald's at 6:30 in the morning when I was getting breakfast because it was just across from my hotel. I was like, I gotta get to that, I gotta get convention, I'll go to McDonald's. Like at 6:30 in the morning, I was like, sign a book, take a selfie. I'm like, what is happening? What is going on? Um, yeah, and then you come home and it's life, back to reality.
Yeah.
Um, but so they're good. And like Japan will be really, really cool. Um, and yeah, it'll be on YouTube. They'll stream it.
I feel like we've reached a good kind of wind down point here. Where do you want people to websites, your social media presence? I'll link to as much as I can in the description of all, I'll link to all of it in the description of this episode. But anything you want to hit before we sign off here?
Yeah, no, like my website, adamchristopher.me, and that's also my Blue Sky account.
Well, I just appreciate you being here to talk to me about your career and your fandom. And I really feel like we just scratched the surface. So the door is always open to come back and talk about other things like movies or uh, film collecting, whatever else you want to.
Yes,
Toy collecting. You got some
yes.
incredible toys behind you too.
Gundams. We can talk about Gundams.
High-end collectibles. They're not toys. They're high-end collectibles.
Yes.
I see the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man up there too.
Oh, that's an original 84.
Is it really?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's do this again really soon, Adam. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much.